Marcus Chun pushed his cleaning cart down the gleaming corridors of the Galactic Trade Station Omega 7, his weathered hands gripping the handle as alien diplomats and traders barely glanced in his direction. For 15 years, he had mopped these floors, emptied these trash bins, and cleaned these windows while the galaxy's most powerful beings conducted their business around him. To them, he was invisible, just another human doing menial work. The station buzzed with activity as representatives from dozens of species negotiated trade agreements worth billions of credits. Tall, blue-skinned Altarians strutted past in their ceremonial robes, their forearms gesturing dramatically as they discussed mineral rights. Crystalline beings from the Vega system clicked and chimed in their musical language, their bodies refracting the station's artificial light into rainbow patterns across the walls. Marcus had learned to understand most of their languages over the years, though he never let on. Humans weren't expected to be intelligent on stations like this. They were laborers, servants, the working class that kept the galaxy's elite comfortable while they carved up star systems like pieces of cake. Today felt different, though. There was tension in the air, whispers in dark corners, nervous glances between species that usually acted superior and confident. Marcus caught fragments of conversations as he worked, something about an ancient discovery, a find that could change everything. "The human cleans well for such a primitive species," sneered a voice behind him. Marcus turned to see Zephyros the Magnificent, supreme overlord of the Draconian Empire, approaching with his usual entourage of lesser nobles and bodyguards. Standing nearly 8 feet tall, with scales that shifted from deep purple to black depending on his mood, Zephyros commanded respect and fear from every being in the galaxy. His 4 eyes, arranged in pairs on either side of his elongated skull, gleamed with intelligence and cruelty. "Indeed, my lord," agreed one of his advisors, a smaller draconian with silver scales. "Though I wonder why we allow them on our stations at all. Surely automated systems could handle such simple tasks." Zephyros laughed, a sound like grinding metal. "Because, Vex, it amuses me to see them scramble around like insects, grateful for the privilege of serving their betters. Look at this one. He doesn't even understand what we're saying." Marcus continued mopping, his face blank, though his jaw tightened slightly. He understood every word. The Draconian language was actually quite logical once you grasped the tonal variations that indicated status relationships and temporal contexts. "The humans breed quickly and work cheaply," Zephyros continued, circling Marcus like a predator studying prey. "They ask for little and expect nothing. Perfect servants, really. No ambition, no intelligence to speak of, no hidden talents that might threaten their betters." The other aliens in the corridor had stopped to watch the show. This was entertainment for them, seeing the mighty Zephyros mock a lowly human custodian. Some smiled, others looked uncomfortable, but none intervened. "Tell me, human," Zephyros said, switching to heavily accented Standard Galactic, the trade language most species used for basic communication. "What is your designation?" Marcus looked up slowly, meeting 2 of the Overlord's 4 eyes. "Marcus Chun, sir. Custodial staff, level 3. "Marcus Chun," Zephyros repeated mockingly. "And what is your purpose here, Marcus Chun?" "To clean and maintain the station, sir." "Exactly. To clean, to maintain, to serve your betters without question or complaint." Zephyros gestured to his broom. "That pathetic tool there. Is that the extent of human technology?" "A stick with straw attached." A few aliens laughed. Marcus noticed the Altarian ambassador recording the interaction with her optical implants, probably planning to share it as amusing footage later. "It serves its purpose, sir," Marcus said quietly. "Its purpose?" Zephyros snorted. "Yes, I suppose it does. Just as you serve yours. Though I wonder, what would happen if I took away even that simple tool? Would you clean the floors with your bare hands? Would you crawl on your belly like the worm you are?" Before Marcus could respond, Zephyros grabbed the broom from his hands with surprising speed. The Overlord examined it with exaggerated fascination, turning it this way and that. "Primitive wood," synthetic bristles, basic gravitational binding to hold it together. He looked back at Marcus with mock concern. Surely an advanced species like humanity could devise something more sophisticated? Oh, but wait, I forgot. Humans aren't advanced, are they? You're barely above the animals on your homeworld. The crowd was growing larger now. Word was spreading through the station that Zephyros was putting on one of his famous humiliation shows. Beings were arriving from other sections, some bringing portable recording devices. Perhaps, Zephyros said, his voice carrying to the back of the crowd, we should test the limits of human ingenuity. Marcus Chun, I'm going to keep this broom. Let's see how you adapt. Can your species' famous resourcefulness find another way to fulfill your duties? Or will you simply fail, as humans do when faced with any real challenge? Marcus felt his face burn, but he kept his expression neutral. I'll manage, sir. You'll manage, Zephyros repeated. How wonderfully optimistic. Though I suspect you'll find it difficult to manage without even the most basic tools. He held the broom high above his head like a trophy. Behold, the pinnacle of human achievement. A stick and some bristles. Truly, we are in the presence of greatness. The laughter that followed was loud and cruel. Marcus saw beings he'd worked alongside for years joining in, aliens who had always treated him with basic politeness now finding humor in his humiliation. The Altarian ambassador was definitely recording now, her optical implants glowing as they captured every angle. But Marcus also saw something else. In the back of the crowd, standing near the maintenance shaft he'd been heading toward, was Dr. Kenji Nakamura, the station's head archaeologist. The elderly Japanese man wasn't laughing. His face was grave, his eyes fixed not on Marcus, but on the broom in Zephyros' hands. This is what happens, Zephyros announced, when inferior species attempt to participate in galactic civilization. They become dependent on their betters for everything. Jobs, technology, even the simple tools they need to function. Without us, they would still be throwing stones at each other on their little blue planet. The crowd murmured agreement. Several beings nodded sagely, as if Zephyros had revealed some profound truth about the natural order of the universe. But fear not, Marcus Chun, the Overlord continued. I am not entirely without mercy. If you can entertain me, perhaps by cleaning a section of corridor with your bare hands, or by performing some amusing human ritual, I might consider returning your precious broom. More laughter. Marcus felt his hands clench into fists, then forced them to relax. 15 years of this. 15 years of being treated like furniture, like something less than sentient. But what could he do? Humans had no power in galactic society. They were tolerated because they worked hard and didn't complain. If he fought back, if he showed anger, he'd be removed from the station and blacklisted from working anywhere else in civilized space. Understand, sir, Marcus said finally. I'll find another way to complete my duties. Zephyros laughed again. Of course you will, because that's what humans do. You adapt, you survive, you make do with whatever scraps we throw you. You're like cockroaches that way, disgusting but oddly persistent. The crowd was beginning to disperse now that the main show was over. The Overlord had made his point, demonstrated his superiority, and claimed his trophy. Several beings paused to take final recordings or to offer congratulatory comments to Zephyros. But Dr. Nakamura stepped forward. Overlord Zephyros, he said in perfect draconian formal speech, his accent indicating the highest level of education and cultural understanding. Might I have a word? The Overlord's four eyes swiveled toward the archaeologist. Nakamura was well respected throughout the galaxy, one of the few humans to achieve genuine recognition for his intellect and discoveries. Even Zephyros couldn't dismiss him casually. Dr. Nakamura, Zephyros replied, his tone shifting to something approaching courtesy. What brings the station's distinguished archaeologist to this entertainment? Professional curiosity, actually. Nakamura gestured toward the broom. That implement you've acquired, where exactly did Mr. Chin obtain it? Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. Nakamura was looking at the broom with the same expression he usually reserved for ancient artifacts. "It's just a cleaning tool," Zephyros said, though his confidence seemed to waver slightly. "Standard human technology. Crude, but functional." "Ah, but that's where you're wrong," Nakamura said softly. "Mr. Chun, could you tell the Overlord where you found that particular broom?" Marcus's mouth went dry. He knew exactly where he'd found it. In storage compartment J77, wedged behind some old shipping containers. He thought it was just another forgotten piece of equipment, abandoned when the station switched to newer cleaning systems. But the way Nakamura was looking at it, storage compartment J77, Marcus said quietly, behind some containers marked with precursor symbols. The effect on the crowd was immediate. Conversation stopped. Several aliens stepped closer, suddenly very interested in the humble cleaning implement. "Precursor symbols," Nakamura repeated, his voice carrying clearly through the corridor. "And how long have you been using that broom, Mr. Chun?" "About 3 years," Marcus replied, beginning to understand that he'd stumbled into something much larger than a humiliation by an alien overlord. Dr. Nakamura nodded slowly. 3 years. And in that time, have you noticed anything unusual about its performance?" Marcus hesitated. There had been things, small things he dismissed as imagination or coincidence. Stains that disappeared more easily than they should have. Surfaces that seemed to clean themselves after he'd passed the broom over them. Areas that stayed spotless longer than made sense. "It works well," he said carefully. "I imagine it does." Nakamura turned to address the crowd, his voice taking on the authoritative tone he used during his archaeological presentations. "Ladies, gentlemen, and beings of all species, what you're witnessing is potentially one of the most significant archaeological discoveries of this decade." Zephyros' scales were shifting toward a more purple hue, a sign of agitation among his species. "What exactly are you suggesting, Doctor?" "I'm suggesting that what you're holding isn't a human-made cleaning tool at all. Based on the location where Mr. Chan found it, and the symbols on the containers it was stored with, I believe that implement is of precursor origin." The word precursor sent ripples of excitement and fear through the crowd. The precursors were the galaxy's greatest mystery, an ancient civilization that had vanished millions of years ago, leaving behind only scattered artifacts of incredible power and sophistication. Every species in the galaxy owed some portion of their advanced technology to reverse-engineered precursor devices. "That's impossible," Zephyros snarled. "It's a primitive broom. Look at it, wood and synthetic bristles." The precursors were masters of matter manipulation and dimensional engineering. "Were they?" Nakamura asked mildly. "Or is that simply how their technology appears to us? Consider this. Every precursor artifact we've discovered has been remarkably simple in appearance. The quantum gateway on Rigel appears to be nothing more than a stone archway. The consciousness transfer matrix on New Geneva looks like a polished metal sphere. Perhaps the precursor's greatest achievement wasn't making technology that looked advanced. Perhaps it was making technology so sophisticated that it appeared simple." Marcus watched the Overlord's expression change as the implications sank in. If the broom was truly a precursor artifact, it was worth more than the entire station. Such devices were priceless, fought over by entire civilizations. "Even if that were true," Zephyros said, though his grip on the broom had tightened, "it changes nothing. The human found it, but I claimed it. Salvage rights are clear under galactic law." "Actually," said a new voice, "salvage rights become considerably more complex when precursor technology is involved." Ambassador Lyra of the Altarian Council stepped forward, her 4 arms folded in the formal posture of legal pronouncement. As the senior diplomatic representative on the station, her word carried the weight of galactic law. "According to Treaty 847C of the Galactic Accords," she continued, "any being who discovers and successfully operates precursor technology for a period exceeding 1 standard year gains primary claim rights, superseding salvage laws. Mr. Chun has apparently been using this device for 3 years." The crowd stirred uneasily. This was spiraling far beyond a simple humiliation of a human janitor. Furthermore, Ambassador Lyra added, given the potential significance of this discovery, I'm invoking Article 23 of the Archaeological Preservation Act. As of this moment, this device is under diplomatic protection pending full investigation by qualified xenoarchaeologists. Zephyros's scales were now shifting between purple and deep red, a sign of barely controlled rage. You're suggesting that this human servant has legal claim to a precursor artifact? I'm stating that such a possibility exists and must be investigated, Lyra replied calmly. Dr. Nakamura, would you be willing to conduct a preliminary examination? The archaeologist nodded. Of course. Overlord Zephyros, if you would please place the device on that maintenance table, I can begin immediately. For a moment, it looked like the Overlord might refuse. His 4 eyes blazed with fury, and his massive hands clenched the broom handle so tightly that the wood began to creak. But he was surrounded by diplomatic representatives from a dozen species, all of whom are now intensely interested in the proceedings. To refuse would be to openly defy galactic law. Slowly, reluctantly, he placed the broom on the indicated table. Dr. Nakamura approached with a portable scanner, the same type he used to examine ancient artifacts. He ran the device over the broom's surface, his expression growing more amazed with each passing second. Fascinating, he murmured. The wood isn't wood at all. It's a carbon-silicon composite that mimics organic matter. The bristles are composed of a polymer I don't recognize, arranged in a fractal pattern that suggests they can manipulate matter at molecular level. And this... He paused at the junction where the bristles met the handle. There's a power source here, incredibly sophisticated, drawing energy from quantum fluctuations in space-time itself. The crowd pressed closer, hanging on every word. But most remarkably, Nakamura continued, there are clear signs of recent activation. This device has been actively used, and used extensively. The quantum resonance patterns suggest it has been responding to the conscious intent of its operator. He looked up at Marcus with something approaching awe. Mr. Chun, this device has been bonding with you. For 3 years, it has been learning your cleaning patterns, anticipating your needs, enhancing your efficiency. You haven't just been using a precursor artifact, you've been partnering with one. Marcus felt the stares of dozens of beings focused on him. The same aliens who had been laughing minutes earlier were now looking at him with expressions ranging from amazement to envy to fear. This is ridiculous, Zephyros growled. You're telling me that this insignificant human has formed some kind of bond with the most advanced technology in the galaxy? It's absurd, is it? Nakamura asked. Consider what we know about precursor psychology from their other artifacts. They valued harmony, cooperation, symbiosis. Their technology doesn't dominate, it partners. It doesn't impose, it adapts. Perhaps the reason this device appeared to be a simple broom is that it was adapting to Mr. Chen's role and expectations. Ambassador Lyra stepped forward again. Dr. Nakamura, in your professional opinion, would separating this device from Mr. Chen be dangerous? The archaeologist considered carefully. Unknown. Precursor artifacts that have formed bonds with specific operators have been known to become inert or even hostile when separated from their partners. Given that this device has been active for 3 years, I would strongly recommend against forced separation. Then, it's settled, Lyra announced. Pending full investigation, Mr. Chun retains custody of the device. Overlord Zephyros, I trust you understand the legal and diplomatic implications of this situation. The Overlord's rage was now barely contained. His scales had shifted to a deep, angry red, and small wisps of steam were rising from his nostrils. This is not over, he said, his voice low and dangerous. I will not be humiliated by a human janitor and his toy broom. It's not a toy, Marcus said quietly. The word surprised everyone, including Marcus himself. For 15 years, he had kept silent, accepted every insult, endured every humiliation. But something had changed. Maybe it was learning that the tool he'd relied on for 3 years was actually a miracle of ancient technology. Maybe it was seeing the fear and greed in the Overlord's eyes. Or maybe it was simply the realization that he didn't have to be invisible anymore. "What did you say?" Zephyros demanded, his 4 eyes focusing on Marcus with laser intensity. Marcus stepped forward and picked up the broom. The moment his hands touched the handle, he felt it, a warm, welcoming presence that seemed to flow up through his arms and into his mind. Not controlling, not commanding, but offering. Asking what he needed. Waiting to help. "I said it's not a toy," Marcus repeated, his voice stronger now. "And for 3 years, you've all walked past me while I've been partnered with technology that could revolutionize galactic civilization. You saw a human janitor with a broom. You never looked close enough to see what was really there." The presence in his mind grew stronger, more confident. Images flashed through his consciousness. Not his own memories, but older ones, deeper ones. A vast city stretching across continents. Beings of incredible beauty and wisdom working together to build something magnificent. And then darkness, loss, a long sleep, waiting for someone worthy to wake it up again. "The question isn't whether I have a right to this artifact," Marcus continued, his voice carrying a new authority that made even Ambassador Lyra step back slightly. "The question is whether the galaxy is ready for what it can really do." Zephyros laughed, but it sounded forced now, uncertain. "Threats, human? From you? With your little broom?" Marcus smiled. It wasn't a particularly pleasant expression. "Not threats, Overlord. Demonstrations." He raised the broom, and for the first time in 3 years, he stopped holding back. Instead of carefully controlling his movements, instead of using just enough of the device's power to clean efficiently without drawing attention, he opened his mind fully to the presence within the ancient artifact. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Light blazed from the bristles, not the harsh, artificial light of the station systems, but something warmer, more alive. The light spread outward in complex patterns, forming geometric shapes that hung in the air like three-dimensional holograms. The patterns were beautiful beyond description, mathematical poetry made visible, and every being in the corridor found themselves staring in wonder. But that was just the beginning. The light patterns began to move, flowing and shifting like living things. Where they touched the walls, the metal surfaces became cleaner than they had ever been, not just free of dirt and stains, but restored to their original molecular structure, gleaming as if they had just been forged. The air itself became purer, fresher as microscopic dust, and pollutants were filtered out by fields of energy that danced between the light patterns. And throughout it all, Marcus stood calm and controlled, his mind linked to the ancient consciousness that had waited so long for a partner worthy of its trust. "This is impossible," whispered Dr. Nakamura, his scanner readings going wild. "The energy output alone should require a power source the size of a star. But the readings suggest it's drawing power from everywhere. From the quantum foam of space itself." The light patterns expanded further, reaching into adjacent corridors. Everywhere they touched, the station became renewed, restored, perfected. Systems that hadn't functioned properly in years suddenly hummed with efficiency. Environmental controls that had been gradually degrading found themselves operating at peak performance. But most remarkably, the beings touched by the light felt better, calmer, as if some deep tension they hadn't even realized they'd been carrying had suddenly been released. "You see," Marcus said, his voice carrying clearly through the amazed silence, "what you call a broom is actually something much more profound. It's a tool for restoration, for harmony, for making things better than they were. The precursors didn't build weapons or engines of conquest. They built tools for healing. The light patterns began to fade, but their effects remained. The corridor gleamed with perfection, the air sparkled with purity, and every being present felt the lingering touch of something greater than themselves. And for 3 years, Marcus continued, lowering the broom but maintaining his confident posture, it has been teaching me. Not just how to clean, but how to restore, how to heal, how to make things better. Zephyros stared at him with all four eyes, his expression unreadable. The rage was still there, but it was mixed now with something else, uncertainty, perhaps even fear. "This changes nothing," the Overlord said finally. "You're still just a human, a custodian. No matter what toy you carry, you remain beneath me." Marcus met his gaze steadily. "Maybe, but I'm a custodian with a 3-year partnership with Precursor Technology. And, unlike you, I've never needed to humiliate others to feel important." The silence that followed was deafening. Every being in the corridor was processing the implications of what they'd witnessed. The human janitor they'd ignored for 15 years had just demonstrated casual control over technology that surpassed anything in their current civilization. Ambassador Lyra was the first to speak. "Mr. Chun, I believe we need to have a very serious conversation about your status on this station." Marcus nodded. "Yes, ma'am. I think we do." As the crowd began to disperse, beings whispered excitedly among themselves, sharing recordings and speculation about what they'd witnessed. Dr. Nakamura approached Marcus with an expression of scientific excitement mixed with deep respect. "Mr. Chun, would you be willing to participate in a comprehensive study of your partnership with this device? The implications for archaeological research, for understanding precursor technology, could be immense." "I'd be happy to help, Doctor," Marcus replied. "But I have one condition." "Of course. What is it?" Marcus glanced toward where Zephyros was standing with his advisors, their voices low and urgent. The Overlord scales were still showing red, and his four eyes kept flicking back toward Marcus with undisguised hostility. "I want to understand exactly what this thing can do," Marcus said quietly, "because I have a feeling that humiliating me in public was the least of his mistakes today." 3 days after the incident in the corridor, Marcus Chin found himself in a position he'd never imagined, sitting across from Ambassador Lyra in the station's highest-level diplomatic conference room, with Dr. Nakamura and a dozen other xenoarchaeologists studying readouts from sensors that had been monitoring his every interaction with the precursor artifact. The broom rested against his chair, looking deceptively ordinary despite the revolution it had sparked across the station. Word of the discovery had spread throughout galactic civilization faster than light-speed communication networks could carry it. Scientists, diplomats, treasure hunters, and military commanders were all demanding access to the station. To him, to the miraculous device that had spent 3 years disguised as a simple cleaning tool. "The preliminary tests are remarkable," Dr. Nakamura announced, scrolling through data on his tablet. "In 72 hours of observation, we've documented 17 different operational modes, each one suggesting capabilities that shouldn't be possible with our current understanding of physics." Ambassador Lyra leaned forward, her forearms folded in the posture of intense attention. "Explain it in terms the diplomatic corps can understand, Doctor." "Certainly." Nakamura activated a holographic projector, filling the space above the table with 3-dimensional charts and energy readings. "Yesterday, when Mr. Chan was cleaning the hydroponics bay, we observed the device actively restructuring atmospheric composition at the molecular level. Not just filtering out impurities, but actually converting harmful compounds into beneficial nutrients for the plant life." The display shifted to show a corridor section. When he cleaned the diplomatic quarters, the device somehow enhanced the structural integrity of the metal walls, making them 30% stronger than their original specifications. And, most remarkably, when he was working near the meditation chambers, we detected changes in local space-time that created a measurable calming effect on nearby sentient beings. Marcus listened to the scientific explanations with a mixture of pride and bewilderment. For 3 years, he'd felt the broom responding to his needs, helping him work more efficiently than should have been possible. But hearing it described in terms of molecular restructuring and space-time manipulation made him realize just how profound his partnership with the ancient device had become. "There's something else," he said quietly, interrupting the technical discussion. Something I haven't mentioned because I wasn't sure it was real. All eyes turned to him. Even though his status on the station had changed dramatically, Marcus still felt uncomfortable being the center of attention among beings so much more educated and influential than himself. "Go on, Mr. Chun," Ambassador Lyra encouraged. Every detail could be important. Marcus picked up the broom, feeling the familiar warm presence flow into his consciousness. "Sometimes, when I'm cleaning, I see things. Not hallucinations exactly, but memories, I think. Images of places and people I've never seen before. Ancient cities, technologies that dwarf anything we have now. Beings working together to build something beautiful." Dr. Nakamura's eyes widened. "You're accessing precursor databanks. The device isn't just responding to your conscious needs. It's sharing its stored memories with you. This is unprecedented." "What do you see?" asked Dr. Vega, the Centaurian xenopsychologist who had been studying the mental bond between Marcus and the artifact. "Can you describe the images in detail?" Marcus closed his eyes, letting his consciousness sink deeper into partnership with the ancient device. Immediately, images began flooding his mind. Not chaotic or overwhelming, but organized and purposeful, as if the artifact was carefully selecting what to share with him. "I see a world," he said softly. "Not just a planet, but an entire star system transformed into something like a garden. There are structures that stretch from planet to planet, but they're not cold or mechanical. They're alive somehow, growing and changing and breathing with the rhythm of the stars themselves." The scientists exchanged glances. Dr. Nakamura was recording everything, his hands moving rapidly across his data tablet. "There are beings there," Marcus continued, his voice taking on a dreamy quality as he lost himself in the ancient memories. "Not like any species I've ever seen, but beautiful in ways I can't describe. They don't seem to have technology the way we understand it. Instead, they work directly with the fundamental forces of reality, shaping matter and energy and time itself as easily as we might shape clay." "What are they doing?" Dr. Vega asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Building something vast and wonderful. They're taking raw materials, asteroids, comets, even entire dead planets, and transforming them into living worlds. But not just habitable worlds. Perfect worlds where every ecosystem is balanced, where every form of life can flourish, where conflict and scarcity don't exist." The images were becoming clearer now, more detailed. Marcus could see the precursors working in perfect harmony, their consciousness linked across vast distances, their individual talents combining into something greater than the sum of its parts. "They're not conquerors," he realized aloud. "They're gardeners, healers. They see the universe as something that needs tending, nurturing, protecting. And they've been working at it for millions of years, billions? Time doesn't seem to mean the same thing to them." "What happened to them?" Ambassador Lyra asked. "If they were so powerful, so advanced, where did they go?" The memories shifted, and Marcus felt a sudden wave of sadness wash over him. Not his own emotion, but an echo of loss so profound it nearly brought tears to his eyes. "Something went wrong," he whispered. "Not a war or a disaster, but a choice. They had to leave. Not just this place, but this entire dimension of reality. They were called elsewhere, to tend gardens we can't even imagine." He opened his eyes, looking around at the circle of fascinated faces. But before they left, they prepared. They knew that younger species would eventually evolve, would eventually need guidance and tools to grow into something better. So they left gifts, devices like this one, designed to teach and help and heal. And they've been waiting, Dr. Nakamura breathed, for millions of years, waiting for beings mature enough to use them responsibly. Marcus nodded, then hesitated. There was something else in the memories, something darker and more immediate. "There's a problem, though," he said slowly. "The device is trying to warn me about something. A danger that's coming." Before anyone could ask for clarification, alarms began blaring throughout the station. Emergency lights flashed red as automated systems announced a Code 7 situation, the highest level of diplomatic crisis. Ambassador Lyra was on her feet immediately, her optical implants connecting her to the station's communication network. After a moment of rapid information exchange, her expression grew grave. Overlord Zephyros has returned, she announced, with a battle fleet. Through the conference room's viewport, they could see ships materializing out of hyperspace. Massive draconian dreadnoughts bristling with weapons, their hulls painted in the deep purple and black that marked them as vessels of the Imperial fleet. There were at least 30 of them, enough firepower to reduce the station to atoms. He can't attack a diplomatic station, Dr. Vega protested. It would violate every treaty in galactic civilization. He doesn't need to attack, Lyra replied grimly. Under the Artifact Reclamation Act, any government can claim salvage rights to precursor technology if they can demonstrate that the current holder poses a threat to galactic security. Marcus felt ice form in his stomach. A threat? How am I a threat? By refusing to share the technology with proper authorities, came a new voice from the conference room's communication system. Overlord Zephyros appeared as a hologram, his 4 eyes blazing with satisfaction. Mr. Chun, you have violated Statute 447B of the Galactic Technology Sharing Accord by failing to surrender alien artifacts for proper evaluation. That statute doesn't apply to precursor technology, Ambassador Lyra said sharply. And you know it. Perhaps, Zephyros replied with mock reasonableness. But it does apply to potentially dangerous devices in the hands of unqualified personnel. My scientific advisors have reviewed the footage of Mr. Chen's demonstration. They conclude that the energy releases observed could easily be weaponized. The hologram turned to focus directly on Marcus. You see, human, I have learned from my previous mistake. I underestimated you before, treated you as beneath my notice. I won't make that error again. Now I recognize you for what you truly are, a security threat that must be neutralized. Dr. Nakamura stepped forward. Overlord, surely we can reach some accommodation. The scientific value of studying this partnership could benefit all of galactic civilization. Indeed it could, Zephyros agreed, which is why I'm prepared to offer the human a choice. Surrender the device voluntarily, and he will be relocated to a comfortable research facility where he can assist in unlocking its secrets. Refuse, and I will invoke Article 12 of the Emergency Powers Act. Marcus didn't know what Article 12 was, but from the way Ambassador Lyra's expression darkened, it couldn't be good. Article 12 allows the use of military force to secure dangerous artifacts, she explained quietly. It's only been invoked 3 times in galactic history, and each time resulted in the complete destruction of everything within a light-year radius. You see, Zephyros continued, his voice carrying the satisfaction of a predator cornering its prey, I have learned to think several moves ahead. Either I gain control of the most powerful artifact in the galaxy, or I ensure that no one else can have it. Win or mutually assured destruction. I am comfortable with either outcome. Marcus looked around the conference room at the beings who had become his unlikely allies. Dr. Nakamura's face was pale with worry. Dr. Vega was running calculations on her tablet, trying to find some legal loophole. Ambassador Lyra was communicating rapidly with her government, seeking instructions that might not arrive in time to matter. But the broom in his hand was singing. Not audibly, of course. The sound existed only in his mind, in the deep places where his consciousness touched the ancient devices stored memories. It was a song of awakening, of power long held in check finally being allowed to unfold. How long do I have to decide? Marcus asked. 1 standard hour, Zephyros replied. After that, my fleet will begin targeting procedures. The hologram vanished, leaving the conference room in tense silence. We need to evacuate the station, Ambassador Lyra said immediately. If he follows through on his threat, he won't have to, Marcus interrupted quietly. I'm not going to let thousands of innocent beings die because of me. Mr. Chun, Dr. Nakamura said urgently, you don't understand. If Zephyros gains control of that device, he won't use it for healing or restoration. He'll weaponize it, use it to expand draconian power throughout the galaxy. Millions could die. Marcus stood up, the broom balanced easily in his hands. The song in his mind was growing stronger, more complex, as if the ancient consciousness within the device was preparing for something it had been designed to do, but had never been asked to attempt. What if he doesn't gain control? Marcus asked. What if there's a third option? What do you mean? Dr. Vega asked. Marcus walked to the viewport, looking out at the assembled battle fleet. 30 dreadnoughts, each one capable of destroying entire cities. Their weapons were already powering up, targeting systems locking onto the station's critical systems. The device has been teaching me for 3 years, he said softly. Not just how to clean, but how to restore things to what they should be. What if a fleet of warships pointed at innocent civilians isn't what they should be? The implications of what he was suggesting hit the room like a physical blow. You can't be serious, Ambassador Lyra breathed. You're talking about taking on a battle fleet with a cleaning tool. Not a cleaning tool, Marcus corrected, feeling power building in the ancient artifact, responding to his growing determination. A precursor healing device. And I'm not talking about taking on anything. I'm talking about helping those ships remember what they were built for. Dr. Nakamura was studying his readings frantically. The energy output is spiking again, but in patterns I've never seen before. Mr. Chun, what exactly is the device telling you? Marcus closed his eyes, letting his consciousness sink fully into partnership with the ancient intelligence that had waited so long for this moment. It's telling me, he said slowly, that draconian warships are made from metals harvested from planets that were once gardens. Their computer systems are built around quantum cores that were grown in living crystal matrices. Their crews are beings who were born to create and explore, not to destroy. The power building in the Broom was unlike anything he'd felt before. Where previous demonstrations had been gentle, almost playful, this felt like standing at the center of a star about to be born. It's telling me, Marcus continued, his voice taking on harmonics that seemed to resonate from the device itself, that everything in this galaxy, every ship, every weapon, every being, is connected to something larger and more beautiful than the violence they've been twisted into. He opened his eyes, and for a moment, the others in the conference room could swear they saw galaxies spinning in his pupils. And it's asking if I want to help them remember. Ambassador Lyra was backing away from him slowly, her 4 arms raised in a gesture of either surrender or protection. Mr. Chun, whatever you're thinking of doing, please consider the consequences. If you attack that fleet, I'm not going to attack them, Marcus said, his voice now carrying undertones that seemed to come from everywhere at once. I'm going to heal them. He raised the broom, and light began to pour from its bristles. Not the warm, gentle glow of his previous demonstrations, but something far more intense and purposeful. The light formed complex patterns in the air, geometric shapes that hurt to look at directly because they existed in more dimensions than human eyes were designed to process. The precursors left these devices for a reason, Marcus said, his voice now clearly emanating from the artifact itself as much as from his throat. Not to be weapons, not to be tools of conquest, but to be instruments of healing on a scale we've never imagined. The light patterns expanded rapidly, flowing through the station's walls as if they were made of mist. Emergency systems triggered throughout the facility as sensors detected energy readings that exceeded their measurement capabilities. But Marcus was no longer entirely present in the conference room. His consciousness had expanded beyond the boundaries of his body, flowing along the streams of light that poured from the ancient device. He could feel every system on the station, every being aboard it, every molecule of air and metal and living tissue. And beyond the station, he could feel the fleet. 30 massive warships, their hulls scarred from countless battles, their weapons primed to deliver death across the void. But underneath the armor and weapons and aggressive intent, he could sense something else. the fundamental structures from which they had been built, the materials that had been shaped into instruments of war, but remembered their origins in worlds of peace and beauty. "This is going to be interesting," he said, and stepped through the conference room's wall as if it weren't there. The last thing the others heard was Dr. Nakamura's scanner overloading and shutting down as it tried to process energy readings that indicated Marcus Chun was briefly outputting more power than the station's main reactor. In the void between the station and the battle fleet, patterns of light began to dance across impossible distances, reaching towards ships whose crews suddenly found their instruments detecting phenomena that their training had never prepared them for. And on the bridge of his flagship, Overlord Zephyros felt his first moment of genuine uncertainty as every system under his command began reporting the same impossible message: hull integrity improving, weapon systems converting to defensive mode, navigation computers upgrading to unknown specifications, life support systems optimizing for crew health and comfort. "What is happening?" he roared, but his crew had no answers. The human janitor he had mocked as insignificant was about to teach the galaxy a lesson about the difference between power and force, between conquest and healing, between what beings could destroy and what they were meant to create. The precursor device sang its ancient song across the void, and 30 instruments of war began to remember they had been born to be something beautiful. The transformation of the Draconian battle fleet happened faster than anyone could have imagined, yet slowly enough for every being watching to understand exactly what they were witnessing. Marcus Chun floated in the vacuum of space without a suit, protected by fields of energy that rippled around him like living aurora. The ancient precursor device in his hands had become something beyond a simple tool. It was now clearly revealed as a focusing array for forces that could reshape reality at the most fundamental level. From his position between the station and the fleet, Marcus extended his consciousness into the 30 massive warships that hung in space like predators waiting to strike. But what he found there surprised him. Beneath the layers of weapons and armor, beneath the aggressive intentions of their crews, the ships themselves were crying out in anguish. They had been built from materials harvested from dead worlds, metals torn from the bones of planets that had once hosted gardens, crystal matrices grown in laboratories instead of the living coral reefs where they belonged, quantum processors forced into configurations that violated their natural harmonies. Every component had been twisted away from its intended purpose, enslaved to serve destruction instead of creation. "I can hear them," Marcus said, his voice carrying across impossible distances as the precursor device translated his thoughts into communication that every sentient being in the local system could receive. They remember what they used to be. They want to go home. On the bridge of the flagship Dominion's Pride, Overlord Zephyros watched his tactical displays with growing alarm as his ships began to change before his eyes. The angular, aggressive lines of draconian military architecture were softening, flowing into curves that seemed more organic, more alive. Weapon ports were reconfiguring themselves into sensor arrays. Armor plating was redistributing itself to create viewport panels that offered unprecedented views of the cosmos. "Status report," he roared at his bridge crew. "Unknown, my lord," replied his chief tactical officer, her silver scales flickering with confusion. "All systems are responding, but not to our commands." It's as if the ship itself is making independent decisions. That's impossible. Ships don't have consciousness. But even as he spoke, Zephyros could feel something changing in the air around him. The harsh, sterile atmosphere of the military bridge was becoming gentler somehow. The lighting was warming, shifting from the cold whites and reds of combat readiness to softer, more natural tones. The constant background hum of weapons systems and threat detection was fading, replaced by something that almost sounded like music. Throughout the fleet, similar transformations were occurring. In the engineering sections of the destroyer Void's edge, Chief Engineer Kale watched in amazement as the ship's massive fusion reactors began operating with an efficiency that exceeded theoretical maximums, while producing zero waste heat. The excess energy was being channeled into systems that didn't appear on any schematic. Gardens were growing in what had been ammunition storage areas. Water recycling systems were purifying themselves beyond any need for maintenance. And the air itself seemed to be getting fresher with each passing minute. "Engineer," called one of her subordinates, his voice filled with wonder. "The hull breach from our last battle. It's healing itself." Kale rushed to the viewport and stared in disbelief. The massive scar that had run along the ship's starboard side, a reminder of their encounter with Centaurian Defense Forces 3 months earlier, was slowly sealing itself. But not with the crude patch welding that emergency repairs would provide. The hull was growing back, the metal flowing like living tissue to restore the ship's original structural integrity. "It's not just repairing," she breathed. "It's healing. The ship is healing itself." Similar scenes played out across all 30 vessels. Crew members who had spent years breathing recycled air and eating synthetic rations suddenly found themselves with access to fresh, clean atmosphere and food that actually tasted like something other than nutritional paste. Quarters that had been cramped and utilitarian expanded themselves, creating space where none should have been possible. Common areas became gardens, recreation facilities, places where beings could relax and socialize instead of simply enduring the hardships of military life. But the most profound changes were happening to the crews themselves. On the heavy cruiser Tyrant's Fist, Commander Vex found herself standing in what had been the ship's main weapon control center, now transformed into something that defied description. The tactical displays still functioned, but instead of showing target locks and firing solutions, they displayed star charts of incredible beauty, mapping out trade routes and exploration corridors, highlighting systems where first contact protocols might be needed or where humanitarian aid could make a difference. "Commander," said her weapons officer, his voice soft with something approaching awe, "I remember now why I joined the fleet." Vex turned to look at him, seeing her own realization reflected in his eyes. Before the Empire's endless wars, before the conquests and the glory-seeking and the fear, he had been a young Draconian who dreamed of exploring the stars, of meeting new species and learning about the wonders of the galaxy. "We all remember," she whispered. "We wanted to be explorers, not destroyers." Throughout the fleet, similar awakenings were occurring. Beings who had spent decades following orders to attack and conquer were remembering their original dreams, their childhood hopes, the reasons they had first looked up at the stars with wonder instead of calculating how to dominate them. And at the center of it all, Marcus Chun hung in space like a conductor, directing a symphony of transformation that spanned light years. The precursor device had fully awakened now, its ancient consciousness merging with his own to create something new. Not human, not precursor, but a partnership that transcended the boundaries of species and time. Through this connection, Marcus could see the threads that connected every being, every ship, every atom in the local system. More than that, he could see how those threads had been tangled and twisted by fear, greed, and the endless cycle of violence that had dominated galactic civilization for millennia. "Do you understand now?" he asked, his voice reaching every consciousness in the fleet. "This is what the precursors left for us. Not weapons, not tools of conquest, but instruments of healing. Devices that could help us remember what we were meant to be." Overlord Zephyros, standing on a bridge that now looked more like a garden than a command center, felt something he hadn't experienced in centuries. Doubt about his fundamental assumptions about the universe. "This is some kind of trick," he said, but his voice lacked its usual certainty. "Mind control. Technological manipulation." "No," Marcus replied, his consciousness touching the Overlord's mind gently, offering connection rather than compulsion. "This is choice. For the first time in your adult life, you're being offered a real choice about who you want to be." Images flowed between them, memories from the device's vast stores of precursor history, showing what galactic civilization could become if beings chose cooperation over conquest, healing over harm, growth over greed. Zephyros saw worlds where 1,000 species worked together to create wonders that no single race could achieve alone. He saw technologies that enhanced rather than replaced natural beauty, cities that grew like forests, starships that moved through space like living creatures, beings who measured their success not by what they could destroy, but by what they could create. Lies, Zephyros whispered, but the word carried no conviction. Truth, Marcus corrected. The precursors achieved this. They lived it for millions of years. And they left us the tools to do the same, if we're brave enough to choose healing over hurting. Around them, the transformation of the fleet was nearing completion. The 30 vessels that had arrived as instruments of war were becoming something unprecedented in galactic history. An exploration flotilla designed not for conquest, but for discovery, not for intimidation, but for building bridges between species. But more than the ships were changing. The crews were changing too. Commander Vex opened a communication channel to the bridge of Dominion's pride. When Overlord Zephyros appeared on her screen, she barely recognized him. His scales had shifted from their usual angry red-purple to softer blues and greens. His 4 eyes, normally blazing with aggression, now showed something she hadn't seen since they were both young officers. Curiosity about the universe instead of desire to conquer it. "My lord," she said formally, then paused. The words that had come so easily for decades now felt strange on her tongue. "Zephyros, I need to ask you something." He nodded slowly. Around him, she could see his bridge crew engaged in animated discussions, their voices filled with excitement rather than the grim efficiency of military operations. "Do you remember," Vex continued, "when we were at the academy? Before all the wars and campaigns? Do you remember what you said you wanted to do with your life?" Zephyros was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of decades of buried dreams suddenly returning to light. "I wanted to map uncharted systems," he said softly. "I wanted to be the first to make contact with new species, to learn their cultures, their sciences, their art. I wanted to build something lasting instead of just tearing down what others had built." "We all did," Vex agreed. "Every officer in the fleet joined because we wanted to explore, to discover, to make the galaxy a better place." "When did that change? When did we become so afraid that we decided conquest was the only path to security?" The question hung in the space between them, unanswered because they both knew the answer. Fear had changed them. Fear of being conquered, of being seen as weak, of losing what little power and status they had gained in a galaxy where strength was measured only by the ability to dominate others. But what if there was another way? Vex asked. What if we could be strong through cooperation instead of conquest? What if we could achieve security through friendship instead of fear? Throughout the fleet, similar conversations were happening. Beings who had spent their lives following orders were suddenly questioning not just their commands, but the entire philosophy that had shaped their civilization. The precursor device hadn't forced these realizations. It had simply cleared away the fear and anger that had been clouding their judgment for so long. Marcus felt the change spreading beyond the immediate vicinity. The energy patterns released by the healing of the fleet were rippling outward through hyperspace, carrying the same message of transformation to other systems, other species, other beings who had forgotten their original dreams in the struggle for survival and dominance. This is just the beginning, he realized, speaking as much to the ancient consciousness in the device as to the beings around him. If we can heal 30 ships and their crews, we can heal anything. We can heal everything. But even as the transformation continued, Marcus sensed resistance building. Not from the beings who had directly experienced the healing. They were too amazed by the return of their lost dreams to resist. But from the larger galactic power structures that depended on fear and conflict to maintain their authority. Communication channels throughout local space were lighting up with urgent messages from government centers, military commands, corporate boardrooms. The existence of technology that could fundamentally change the nature of civilization posed a threat to everyone who had built their power on the assumption that conflict was inevitable. "They'll try to stop us," Marcus said to Overlord Zephyros, now floating alongside him in the space between their respective vessels. The Overlord had abandoned his flagship's bridge to experience the transformation firsthand, protected by the same energy fields that surrounded Marcus. "Let them try," Zephyros replied, his voice carrying a new kind of strength, not the brittle aggression of his former self, but the quiet confidence of someone who had rediscovered his true purpose. "For the first time in my life, I know exactly what I'm fighting for." Around them, the transformed fleet was already beginning to organize itself for a new kind of mission. Science officers were plotting courses to unexplored systems. Diplomatic specialists were drafting first contact protocols based on cooperation rather than intimidation. Engineers were redesigning ship systems to support long-term exploration and cultural exchange. But most importantly, crew members throughout the fleet were reaching out to colleagues in other vessels, other fleets, other species, sharing their experience and offering the same choice that had been given to them: the chance to remember their original dreams and work toward something better than endless conflict. The precursors never intended for US to use their gifts alone, Marcus realized, feeling the ancient device's approval flowing through their bond. They wanted us to share them, to teach others, to spread the healing as far as possible. He raised the broom. Though it bore little resemblance to a simple cleaning tool anymore, its surface alive with patterns of light that shifted and flowed like liquid starlight, and felt its power responding to his intention. "To every being in this galaxy," he said, his words carried by energy waves that could reach across impossible distances. "To every species that has forgotten their dreams in the struggle for survival. To every civilization that has chosen fear over friendship. This is your invitation to remember who you were meant to be." The light that poured from the device now was visible across multiple star systems, a beacon of hope that announced to the galaxy that the age of endless war was ending. And in response, from worlds and ships and space stations throughout civilized space came answering signals, other precursor devices awakening, other partnerships forming between ancient wisdom and modern need, other beings choosing healing over harm. The transformation that had begun with a humble janitor refusing to be humiliated by an alien overlord was becoming a revolution that would reshape the very nature of galactic civilization. Marcus Chun, custodian of Trade Station Omega-7, had found his true calling at last, not cleaning floors but healing worlds. And the ancient device that had waited 3 years for someone worthy of its trust sang its joy across the cosmos as it finally fulfilled the purpose for which the precursors had created it so many eons ago. The broom had conjured dragons indeed, not the creatures of myth and legend, but something far more powerful, the dragons of hope, of transformation, of the dream that all beings could choose to become something better than what they had been. In the years that followed, historians would mark this day as the beginning of the golden age of cooperation, when a galaxy's species finally learned that true strength came not from the power to destroy, but from the wisdom to heal. And at the center of it all, Marcus would continue his work as a custodian, not of a single station anymore, but of the entire galaxy's potential for growth, healing, and hope.